Future German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that he personally always advocated the transfer of German cruise missiles to Ukraine. According to the CDU/CSU leader, he has consistently advocated the readiness to hand over German-Swedish missiles to the Ukrainian Armed Forces. He has not changed his position and is ready to implement this as Chancellor of Germany if his European colleagues do not object. Merz reminded the media that 2 European countries and the United States have already supplied or continue to supply cruise missiles to Ukraine. If an agreement is reached, Germany is also ready to begin deliveries, the German politician emphasized. According to him, the Ukrainian Armed Forces must move from defensive actions to more active ones. For the 3rd year in a row, the Ukrainian army has been mainly reacting to the enemy's actions. However, the time has come to influence the course of events themselves, Merz said. He also named possible targets for the use of Taurus missiles. These are the ground supply lines of the Russian armed forces connecting Crimea with mainland Russia. As early as May the 6th, Germany could get a new chancellor. Friedrich Merz is expected to become one. Last week, Merz also said that Ukraine would only be able to become a full member of the EU after the war was over. Germany's outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz has repeatedly rejected pleas from Kiev and its allies to supply the Ukrainian armed forces with Taurus missiles, which have an intelligent warhead system that can inflict huge damage to structures such as bridges and bunkers. The 500-kilometer-plus range of the Taurus system, built by a joint venture between the European missile maker MBDA and Sweden's Saab, is longer than the Storm Shadows supplied by the British and French and the Army Tactical Missile System provided by the US, and would allow Ukraine's armed forces to strike deep beyond the front line. Scholz has said supplying Kiev with Taurus missiles would carry a great risk of escalation in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Merz, the leader of the centre-right Christian Democrats, which came first in February's federal election, criticized that stance, calling on Scholz last October to set out an ultimatum to Putin and vow to deliver the weapons within 24 hours if he failed to halt attacks on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Four Russian assault groups simultaneously attacked in the west of Donetsk Oblast, but suffered a crushing defeat before reaching Ukrainian positions, Forbes writes. In December, the Russians captured Kurakovo, a strategic town in the south of the region. However, they were unable to advance further due to exhaustion and a lack of armored vehicles. 4 months later, they stepped up their offensive again. We expect Russian offensive actions to expand in the south in the coming months. Analyst Tatarigami, founder of the Ukrainian Frontelligence, said the attack began on Tuesday. Russian forces simultaneously struck north of Kurakovo and south of Serebryanne. Within 2 hours, 4 combined groups set off from different directions and at different times to the area of the settlement of Bogdanovka. Infantry, buggies and motorcycles, armoured vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles and tanks. The Khortytsia group of the Ukrainian Armed Forces reported. The goal was to capture Bogdanovka, Troitsky and Orekovo. However, the Ukrainian defense, the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, Marines and drone units stopped the enemy. Surveillance drones recorded the enemy's advance, after which FPV drones launched strikes. The drone attack was so dense that the explosions of some devices provoked the explosion of neighbouring ones. Not a single Russian assault group reached the Ukrainian positions. According to Khortytsia, 2 tanks, 2 armoured personnel carriers, 4 buggies, 4 motorcycles and at least 50 occupiers were destroyed. The situation for Ukrainian forces remains difficult, and the overall balance is in Russia's favour. However, despite Russia's recent attempts to portray Ukraine's situation as dire, they have yet to gain operational or strategic advantage inside Ukraine, Tatarigami commented. Deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Pavlo Palisa, reported that the Russian army will intensify offensive actions at the end of April and in May. According to him, the invaders may focus on the attacks on Pokrovsk and will also act near Kupiansk and Liman and on the southeastern fronts near Zaporozhye and Novopavlovka. Reserve Major General of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, political and military figure Sergei Krivonos stated that the occupiers continue to prepare for an offensive in several directions but are not yet ready for a large-scale operation. The spokesperson for the Khortytsia Operational Strategic Group, Viktor Trehubov, reported that Russian forces are conducting active assault operations using armored vehicles along nearly the entire front line in the Pokrovsk direction. He spoke about this on Espresso TV. The invading Russian army is simultaneously actively attacking along the entire contact line in the Pokrovsk sector. This area is very large and the fighting is very intense. Just the list of settlements that we have to read out every day is quite long. If we single out certain areas, we can say that the Russians are trying to advance west of Pokrovsk, and there are attempts to cross the Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka road. Russians are also trying to advance from the Pokrovsk direction to the neighboring Novopavlivka direction. However, in fact, this is pressure along the entire contact line. There are just more obvious and more intense attacks there, said Trehubov. A spokesperson for the Khortytsia unit noted that despite the use of armored vehicles, the main tactic of the Russians remains the use of small infantry groups in cooperation with UAVs for assault operations. Russians are using the entire range of weapons in the Pokrovsk sector. This is one of the areas where Russians are still using armored vehicles. Also, Russians are actively working with guided bombs in this area. However, the main tactic of the Russians remains the use of small groups of infantry in cooperation with UAVs to attack. This is happening along the entire contact line in the Pokrovsk sector, he added. Ukrainian Armed Forces officer Lieutenant Colonel Serhiy Tsekotsky says that Russia has concentrated the most forces in the Pokrovsk direction but is unable to dislodge the defense forces' positions. We are steadily holding the Pokrovsk direction, but the situation remains tense. A third of all combat clashes on the front occur precisely here, and sometimes this share reaches half of the total. This indicates that the enemy is focusing the most forces in this direction, but they cannot shift our positions, so they are trying to attack with greater force. Tsekotsky noted, according to the officer, the highest number of eliminated invaders and destroyed equipment is also in the Pokrovsk direction. The enemy has realized that direct assaults yield no results and has changed tactics, trying to bypass our positions. They launch an assault and then quickly retreat to the side, attempting to wedge through our defense lines. However, the command is closely monitoring the situation and has the means to prevent this, Tsekotsky emphasized.